Hello again, dear participant of LibertyCon 2025 in Prague. Let's continue with our first panel of the day. Before that, just a quick note that if you are registered to the Civil Resistance Workshop, it starts upstairs right now. But now, here on the stage, joining us on this stage is Elena Leontjeva. Big applause for her. And Elena Leontjeva is the president of the Lithuanian Free Market Institute, bringing practical policy insights. And our next speaker is also Philip Booth, esteemed professor at St. Mary University, offering us his academic perspective. And finally, we are joined by Syed Kamall, member of the UK House of Lords, as a moderator. And he's professor at St. Mary University and Vinson Centre University of Buckingham. That's all from me, and enjoy the discussion. And also there will be time for your questions. Enjoy the discussion at LibertyCon.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for choosing this session and exercising your freedom of choice to join us at this session. I was very struck by a couple of the speeches that I have heard at this conference so far. Yesterday, Lawrence Reed was talking about we should not forget the character of liberty. He talked about honesty, humility, responsibility, gratitude, and courage. Earlier on, David Friedman, who we see in the audience, spoke about do not make the moral argument. Show evidence for liberty. But does that sort of evidence of liberty, for example, that evidence for it, does that really then make it too technocratic? You're showing how much GDP went up or how much people can afford more goods, for example. Or have I misunderstood what David Friedman was saying? I'm glad he's here to perhaps correct me later on. So one of the challenges that people write about, particularly in Europe after the Velvet Revolution in this country, the fall of the wall and the loss of legitimacy of communism, was not only to show the superiority of markets over central planning, but also to understand that mix of institutions needed for prosperity and progress: art, education, welfare, morals, religion, neighbourly help, communities, etc. So do we need to rediscover these rich variety of virtues? Or has economics now been too much technocratic, all about numbers and monetarism and monetary bands and how much money you print? Now, in the theory of moral sentiments, Adam Smith, like early pioneers of classical liberalism, believed that people should be guided not only by self-interest, but by duty. And he talks about how he challenges individuals to find the best in themselves, to realize their potential. And one of the criticisms of conservative thinkers in America and the UK, classical liberal economists or fiscal conservatives, was that they used to talk about freedom more in terms of free markets and consumer choice. And Frank Knight, one of the founders of the Chicago School, what we call a hard-boiled approach. But what about issues of social responsibility or moral obligation? Well, we don't use those words because socialists use these words to cover up state intervention and to argue for state intervention. So has economics become too democratic? So not democratic, technocratic. Has it become now all about numbers? Has liberty now been about numbers and more choice or growth in GDP? Or how do we stop that? So what I want to do is really ask my co-panelists an opening question like this. I'll start with Philip and then Elena. Has economics become too much like a spreadsheet? Is there not enough conversation about the other virtues and about human life more widely?
I think in many respects economics has become too much orientated towards statistical modelling and that type of thing, not just in the respects that you mentioned actually. And Friedrich Hayek in his Nobel Prize lecture talked about how that the problem of economists and he was specifically talking about the question of inflation, and we've seen this happen again, how they're focusing on what is measurable rather than what is important. And we saw this in the post-COVID crisis, when central banks around the world dramatically increased the supply of money, whilst governments restricted economic activity essentially by shutting down large parts of the economy. And somehow central banks thought that if you printed enough money, then the economy wouldn't suffer quite so much from COVID. And of course, we know that what happens if you do that is you get inflation. And central banks entirely miss this, I think, because they have models which are designed to be able to understand the fine detail and the finer points over rather short time horizons, to large numbers of decimal places, and miss actually what is fundamentally important, but which is actually more difficult to model in the way that modern day statisticians and economists like to model things. So I think in a whole range of ways, we've lost sight of underlying economic processes, underlying economic forces, etc., and focus instead on turning economics into a branch of statistics, essentially. And I think that's really problematic.
Elena, one of the things that when you learn economics, or what's economics about, is about the issue, we talk about the issue of scarcity. And we talk about choices that have to be made in scarcity. It doesn't mean there's nothing there. It's just that lots of things are not endless. There's not an endless supply of for free or whatever. So we have to make choices. You've written about scarcity in a sort of more philosophical context. What do you think we lose? What do you think we lose generally when economics loses touch with that sort of philosophical and ethical foundations?
Thank you very much for approaching this subject. I always felt uneasy when saying that I'm an economist. I heard, oh, you're a master of numbers, you're good in math. And I was always interested in human beings. And eventually my professional career brought me to reveal that economics is a science of human nature. And philosophy of economics is necessary to reveal the unseen phenomena which lie behind what we know as economic fabric. And you're right by saying that this is scarcity. And I was lucky to find out that scarcity in economics is just one aspect of an overall universal phenomenon of lack, which is everywhere in being, in the structure of being, and in existential condition of a human being. We are all scarce in time, in knowledge, in friendship, in community, and of course in material things. So entrepreneurs are actually experts not in numbers, but experts of human needs. So they respond to human needs, they take resources where they're less valuable and bring them where they will be more valuable. So actually, entrepreneur can be seen as an equalizer of this world, not the socialist, but the entrepreneur. So scarcity and lack is an essential phenomenon which allows us to see the invisible relationship which brings to the visible fabric of economic life. And probably we notice that most important things in life are invisible, like love, hope, scarcity. Invisible thing, but it brings us as human beings to strive. We are the only creatures which we always strive for some aims. And that is why, because we are insatiable. We always have some needs, whether those needs are spiritual, knowledge, material. So the whole humanity can be revealed in a new way if we understand that lack is a trigger. It makes us uneasy and we have to respond to it. And by responding to it, we create welfare in economic side, but also we create community, we create friendship, families. So this is really instrumental to find out the philosophy of economics.
So Philip, I mean, you were saying earlier about central bankers looking at numbers but not really understanding the increased money supply. What do you think that we lose, as it were, when it comes to economics losing touch with sort of its philosophical and its ethical foundations?
Yeah, I mean that's a slightly different issue from the one that I was talking about. But I think that there is a paradox here, that it is important to have specialization within disciplines, and there are certain things which economists can contribute to discussions about all sorts of issues which maybe are unique to economists. But if they do that, as Hayek suggested, without any understanding of the surrounding disciplines of anthropology, philosophy, maybe even theology, legal theory, etc., then I think what Hayek said is that not only are you not a very good economist, but you could be a complete menace. So I think it is important that that economists have an awareness of those surrounding disciplines, but at the same time there are skills which the economist can apply to particular problems which may have a moral aspect to them as well. So the obvious example there would be Gary Becker and the economics of crime, or the economics of marriage. Gary Becker was not making normative statements that people ought to commit crimes if the expected value of doing so is positive, given the likelihood of being caught and the likelihood of being fined or put in prison, as compared with the likelihood of obtaining some gain. But he was making a point there about the people who have an inclination to break the law are more likely to do so if there's going to be a gain from doing so. And in a whole range of other areas, such as the family and so on, Gary Becker made similar observations. So I think there are, it's important to have sight of the wider disciplines, but there are distinct roles, I think, within the wider social science disciplines where economists can contribute to an understanding of issues which might otherwise be looked at rather superficially.
Would you like to comment on that, Elena?
I think when economics is seen as a science of numbers, it gives the rise to the socialist utopias to a big extent. Because people see, look, every enterprise is run as a planned business. We are all interested in the forecast of the GDP. So why don't we organize the whole society as a big company? We plan better, and artificial intelligence will definitely allow us to plan appropriately. So without understanding that spontaneous order is also an order, it is different than a controlled order. It is based on myriad of free solutions, free choices of people, on dispersed information in the market. And this is a beautiful, spontaneous order. And it is impossible to mimicry the needs of the people. It is impossible to mimicry the entrepreneurial risk and ability to satisfy the need. And I would even say, we serve each other on the market. I'm not humiliated to say that by serving each other, we get the profits. So this is a completely different picture of economic community. And if we see economics like this, it is understandable that it's impossible to plan the economic material production of the whole society. Eventually, it means there is no liberty in such a planned central order, but of course people all are aiming at some certainty. So we need to understand how our needs, how our scarcities are met by other people. And only by improving this world, advancing this world, we can advance ourselves. Our scarcity and the scarcities of this world are like, two pieces of the same Lego. And only by acting in this world can we fulfill ourselves.
So thank you. There are... So do you want to
Well, I was just going to say, it's strange, isn't it, that you tend to find that people on the left, socialists, as Elena calls them, are also people who are, tend to be have a preference for policies which, or at least they argue they have preferences for policies which promote peace and so on, rather than, muscular defense, etc. Yet it's those of us who believe in a market that believe that we benefit from mutual, free, peaceful exchange. So we move from a situation where we try and enrich ourselves, and if you look at the history of this part of Europe and then going down into Italy in medieval times and so on, the whole way that cities are built, you can tell are they're built with this in mind. For much of human history, people have tried to enrich themselves by pinching each other's stuff violently, broadly. And then, what do we believe? We believe that we enrich ourselves by actually serving others, by helping others meet their needs in a process of peaceful exchange, which creates a great society. So, in a sense, we are the peace lovers, rather than the left, rather than the socialists.
So just remember that we are the peace lovers. Just remind your friends on the left when they say, make love, not war, or whatever. A couple of issues, as Elena was speaking, a couple of people clearly came up. Clearly, Adam Smith and the theory of moral sentiments. Clearly, Ludwig von Mises and human action, and also Israel Kirzner when it comes to entrepreneurship. I just wonder whether, Elena, I could sort of dive into one or two of those with you. Particularly, you mentioned entrepreneurship. And I understand. I'm a huge fan of Israel Kirzner's books on entrepreneurship. That people see these various factors, they work out how to put them together. Now, he calls it entrepreneurial alertness. Where I disagree with him is that people might see those same factors but not act on it. And there's a difference between just seeing it. For example, I can think in my own life, I've seen business opportunities, and I thought, I can't be bothered to act on it, or I don't want to take the risk. But the entrepreneurs go further and take a risk. Now, that's challenging, because that could be your whole family, it affects your family, it affects your house, it affects your community, you might be taking loans out, etc. Do you want to say something more about, can we really understand the factors that drive entrepreneurship? To understand entrepreneurship, do we really have to understand human nature?
Yes, definitely. Entrepreneurs are experts of human nature, and they see the needs of other people, even those needs which are not yet manifesting themselves. So they go in advance and they create an idea how the life of others can be improved by certain instruments, products, services, and so on. But also entrepreneurs, they do their business in a community of other people, employees as a rule. So you need also to be an expert of human beings and understand the others who work with you. You have to understand all those human insufficiencies, scarcities, and maybe I should make another accent here that when we study scarcity and lack, we understand that it is any kind of imperfection in this world, any kind of incompleteness. And you, Syed, and you, Philip, you both are incomplete personalities. And this is wonderful, because you can aim at completion. If you were already complete and perfect, any change would only bring you down. So this is a wonderful, wonderful revelation in our life, and also lack of time. We, with my colleagues, we understand that we cannot deliver perfect text just because time is scarce, and we always have to set our priorities. And actually, our priorities speak about the biggest scarcity that I have at this moment. So it's incredible adventure to start seeing to which scarcities in your life do you respond, what scarcities push your partner, your students. So a lot of economic fabric can reveal itself when you go into the philosophical roots, into the invisible roots, which are mostly related to this invisible element of lack.
It's very interesting you talk about philosophical roots. And by the way, you say I am incomplete. I should just warn you, my surname, Kamall, in Arabic means perfection. And the verb it comes from is the verb yukmil, which means to complete. But apart from that, it's interesting you talk about the philosophical foundations, because when people do think about more the philosophical foundations rather than the textbook economics, two words come up time and time again, which are values and virtues. And they talk about values and virtues that lead to prosperity. Philip, how would you react to that? Because you've done actuarial science, you've taught economics, but you think about things, you've also looked at Catholic philosophy and Catholic social teaching. How would you reconcile those issues?
Well, funnily enough, I put this question on the agenda because I expected Deirdre McCloskey to be here, and I wanted to listen to her answer to the question. But I think, I mean, she's written 3 volumes on the subject, so I'm really just scratching the surface here. But I think you need both. Douglas North talked about how if you have institutions which encourage piracy, you'll get piracy. So we know that there are certain institutions which encourage those things that you need for a free and prosperous society. Private property, well-functioning justice systems, absence of corruption, and so on and so forth. But also, I think you can have those. It's almost like socialist utopian reasoning to assume that if you somehow create those institutions, you will get the type of society that we'd like to see. No, I think you do need virtues and values to be nurtured within culture, and that comes through families, it comes through education systems, and not necessarily the education systems we have, and it comes through civil society associations, and I would argue too it comes through the church, who should be helping us to understand how we should behave in economic and social life. So I think you need both. But also, of course, if you have a culture, if you have a virtuous culture, then hopefully there's political pressure as well to create the right kind of institutions, which will then create a virtuous circle, for want of a better phrase.
I should also say that Lawrence Reed yesterday did say 2 of the characters. One was humility, so I shouldn't have told you what my surname means, and secondly, honesty, which ties in with one of the things that you said. Now, Elena, the Lithuanian Free Market Institute has got a great reputation. You've done this great textbook in economics that has been shared in many other countries across the region and actually in the world. So you clearly think about how we teach economics. So if values and virtues are important in considering liberty, how do you incorporate that into teaching economics? Do you do that in your textbook? How would we do it, or should we say that's the philosophical part of it, and let's look at what Mises or Kersner or what Murray Rothbard said?
We unite teaching of economics with teaching of ethics and citizenship, civic education, because we understood that it's not enough if you teach young people about economics and entrepreneurship, while in another class at the ethics they will be taught that profit is evil, money is the root of all evil, and so on. So we unite now ethics and economics in one textbook, and again, scarcity allows to see that every human choice is also a choice it's a moral choice. And only if you understand that capitalism is the most advanced system that humanity could develop, that money is ontologically good because it serves the humanity and it liberates humanity from a lot of calculation and difficulties in exchange. Only when you understand that everything is okay with seeking profit and that the antonym of profit is famine. It's not, morality, it's famine. So only when you understand that, people could be liberated and they could go into business understanding that now every decision I make is a moral choice. Profit is good, but it depends on how you seek your profit. How you treat your employees, how you treat your customers, and so on. So only understanding this can you open the grounds for really morally advanced society. And I think we could benefit a lot for capitalist reputation if we stress how important is the moral choice while everything is okay with capitalism itself. Because I was in Buckingham University and we had a tremendous lecture by one of your colleagues who said that about 2/3 of people who are running businesses, they believe that capitalism is morally evil. So, if someone believes that capitalism is morally evil, but he still has his business, he goes to work in a private enterprise every day, then he conducts moral evil because you believe that something is evil, but you still continue to do it. So to liberate people of this obsession, I think it's a very holy idea.
It's interesting because that business person will be serving their self-interest, and by serving their self-interest, they're serving the society as a whole. Sorry, Philip, you wanted to come in here.
Of course, you can't make a moral choice unless you're free as well. Just worth noting that, I think. A few months ago, I gave a lecture in Poland, and it was a conference on trust and trust in education, especially in pedagogy, how it's taught and so on. And my task was to actually talk about trust in economic life. And I went to the 1,000-page standard textbook that's used in, and in most respects is a very good textbook, that's used in most universities' first-year economics courses in England, in the UK. And there wasn't, I think there was a paragraph on corruption and not a single word on trust, which is extraordinary, really. So even if the textbook hadn't ventured into subjects of anthropology, moral philosophy, and so on, it's not even as a textbook looking at the economic problems caused by an absence of trust, or the economic problems caused by corruption, either in theory or in practice. And of course, the economic problems caused by corruption are absolutely enormous, responsible for poverty in large parts of the world. So again, I think just demonstrates how economics, as it's taught, does us such a huge disservice. And there are particular contributions which the academic discipline of economics can make to a wider discussion, I think, on these issues.
One of the very dear insights of our research was understanding that while humanity doesn't know the important role of scarcity as the vehicle of progress, as the vehicle of community, as a vehicle of creativity and production, the government jumps in and promises the society to relieve all scarcities. So we called one of our publications Government Against Scarcity, how it changes who we are. So I think it's really instrumental for people to come to peace with scarcity as a part of this being, as a part of ourselves, because it liberates from utopias, from socialist utopias. They are all based in ignoring, scarcity and having this vision of a perfected world here on earth. We are here, the room is called the Garden of Eden, so creating Garden of Eden on earth. And also for us, it's also very, very liberating, because understanding that the world is not perfect and I'm not perfect on purpose is also very liberating.
So I want to turn to questions to the audience, but before I do so, I want to pick up on one thing I think it was Elena said. We have a colleague, or a colleague who is at the IEA. We've both worked at the IEA, Institute of Economic Affairs. Christian Niemitz, who writes about socialism, the failed idea that never I can't remember, stops, or people keep. And this argument against the socialists use is every time you point to a country that they praise that then got into trouble, they say, oh, that's not real socialism. Real socialism hasn't been tried yet. Similarly, actually, on our side, after the Liz Truss experiment, many of us are saying, oh, that's not real classical liberalism, even though, sadly, Liz Truss was telling people that she got her economic policy from classical liberals. And so the argument works on both sides. Now, one of the things that I suspect socialists will start arguing back on in terms of real socialism and really trying it, and central planning, is what you said about AI, that we can collect all this data. And actually, now that we've got this data and we can process it and we can look at large data sets from historically, now we can plan economies better. How do we as classical liberal, first of all, do you see that as a threatening argument from the left? And how do we address that, Philip?
Well, yeah, I've heard that argument. I remember discussing it with Andy Haldane, who's a former chief economist at the Bank of England, and he had confidence that the development of AI and so on would make central planning, well, certainly easier, even if not superior to the market. But it misunderstands the market process in its entirety. So the entrepreneurial process, which Elena has discussed, it doesn't start with a spreadsheet. It doesn't start with the accumulation of knowledge and data. It's a series of experiments. We don't even know what we want ourselves until choices are put in front of us. No, why would we bother deciding what we want between, what we prefer between hypothetical alternatives that have never even been presented to us? So it's not until an entrepreneur introduces a new product and we make a choice about how much to pay for that product or whether to buy that over an alternative and so on, that we actually reveal our own preferences. So there's nothing that AI can do to collect that information, because it's not until the entrepreneur has presented us with new products, with innovations and so on, that information even exists.
Elena, can I just ask you for a very brief answer, because I want to open to the audience, but please do answer the question.
Of course, Hayek, in his best piece on a problem of calculation in socialist society, he argued why this is impossible, and the best computer would not be sufficient to collect and to process all this information. And of course, artificial intelligence is still a computer, and I think it's really timely now to explain how the fabric of economy, how it unites all of us with our imperfections, needs, and service to each other.
Yeah, great. So I want to turn to the audience now. Can I just get an idea of how many people would like to ask a question? Is there anyone? Two or three. That's great. Maybe for the others who are still thinking about this, has this session been of interest to you? Do you think we've become too philosophical about it? Have we gone too far the other way? And actually, just talk about virtues and values, and you guys go, well, what's that about? That doesn't put bread on the table, for example. What's your reaction as an audience? Or actually, do you think you're absolutely right? We need to talk more about the morals, the civic virtues, all those issues, and they're just as important. So put your hands up again, those who want to ask questions. So 1, 2, and then 3. So number 1, please. And can I ask, as much as possible, we've only got 10 minutes, so can you keep it as brief as possible, both questions and answers?
They then tell you, well, okay, it might be efficient what you proposing here, but it's not just. So I think that's actually what pushes us back in a lot of debates, that we never go on this moral basis. So, and my question would be, which liberal philosophers, in your opinion, give us good content in order to present moral arguments in favor of capitalism?
Are you trying to avoid it? Shall I answer it?
Okay, yeah. I don't think I can answer that question directly, but I think Hayek is quite helpful here because he breaches the sort of secular religious divide quite well. So, I mean, although Hayek was born and baptized a Catholic and received the sacraments before he died, he wasn't conscious when he did. Most of his life he was an atheist and then probably agnostic. And he had a rather Burkean view of the evolution of morals and institutions within society, not at all the types of views which tend to be ascribed to him by the left. And he thought that religious institutions, religious values, etc., were, if you like, useful from a utilitarian perspective in creating the right environment in which a free society could thrive. So I think that's helpful. You know, people will come at this from different perspectives. You'll get libertarians who are radically secular, who try to justify things either from an empirical perspective or perhaps some other entirely non-religious perspective, and then you'll get religious people who start with, we're all created in the image of God with human dignity, free will, the ability to reason, and so on. And I think Hayek tends to sort of bridge that quite nicely and tells us how we can all, get some common ground.
I think Elena suggested that we move on to the next question, but I will also say, if you've got the time, people will read Wealth of Nations. Think about either reading or listening to a podcast of the theory of moral sentiments as well. And don't forget, I always tell my students, challenge whichever text I give them to read. You don't have to agree with it, but just think about the arguments that are being made. Where's the second question? Right.
I have a question. You talked about AI briefly. Do you think that it is more of an opportunity or a threat for liberty and libertarian economy?
When it's used privately, it's an opportunity. When it's used by the state, it definitely will become a risk.
No, I just agree with that entirely, yeah.
Okay, third question at the back, and then if anyone else wants to ask a question, put your hand up again. Okay, so we'll go to the person on that side and then the person on this side. I know that's very vague, but we'll get there. Go on, please.
Yeah, thank you again. Just wanted to ask kind of similarly.
Put the microphone closer to you, can you?
Oh, yeah. With a lot of kind of more religious people on the right moving away from libertarianism, what can libertarians and classical liberals say to kind of reel back in those more religious people? I would say from a consequentialist perspective, rather than, like you said, the imago Dei dignity perspective. But is there anything from a consequentialist perspective we could say?
Did you say religious or constitutional perspective? Sorry.
Consequentialist.
Right, consequentialist. Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. I mean, I'll just say that there are lots of religious and liberty networks. I mean, I helped co-found with Linda Whetstone the Islam and Liberty Network to build up classical liberal scholars. There are others. There are lots of Christian. Michael Novak, for example, and others. But I'll turn to Philip.
Yeah. Okay. No, I think that's a really good question. So we see this in the United States that the sort of a rejection of what used to be called fusionism, a belief in liberal economics and a slightly social conservative approach, but also a belief that actually, morals should be policed in the private space rather than the public space. And I know quite a lot of these people, and that there's been a reaction amongst religious conservatives against what they see as a belief in liberty detached from any restraints at all, including self-restraints. And I think that's just a misunderstanding of what we believe. And in a sense, I think the high watermark for that was the trans movement, when people took the view that we could just at will change what sex, gender, or whatever we identified with, and enforce rights against others based on that view. And I think a lot of people just thought that was crazy, and then when people like President Trump took that on as an issue, they kind of then attach themselves to other things which he believes. So what should we do? I think it's just really important for us to explain how the belief in liberty is not, in a sense, an individualistic project, but it's a belief in creating a great society which involves cooperation, institutions, families, and that families and civil society institutions should do things that the state currently does. And it's not about living atomistically. The whole point of liberty is to allow people to be free to cooperate, to create a great society. But it's just that the constraints on that don't come from the state, they come from other sources.
The theory of just price was developed by theologians, confessors, who had to respond to people's question, which price is just? And Karl Menger, the founder of the Austrian school, was a devout Catholic, to my knowledge. So to these people, the faith and private liberty and economic liberties of men, they went together. Somehow later on they were separated, but maybe when we look back to the roots, we find something new.
Do you have time for one more question or not? Yeah, okay, very quickly for that one more question, the person there. I just want to say, if you are interested in the sort of some of the issues of liberty and particularly the Abrahamic faiths, you should read Benedict Kohler, who's written about liberty and freedom or free markets, both in Islam, in Judaism and in Christianity, and in the Abrahamic faiths. So that's if you're interested in the ideas. And don't forget, we all have more than one belief system. We don't just believe one thing. We may have a faith, we may have a view of the way the world should be organized, of economics, etc., etc. And it's whether there are any conflicts between those various belief systems. Last question, and then...
Thank you. I'll try to make it quick. To my mind, the fact that economics has transitioned from a humanity into something that aspires to be a science is a marketplace of ideas problem. Essentially, there is a demand for precise prediction, very obviously in finance, but also in government, right? And when you look at the main employers of economics, they're central banks, financial industry, and universities. And the universities themselves get government grants. So, you know, it is no accident that, as Philip pointed out, modern monetary theory concluded that you could print as much money as you wanted with no ill effects. The conclusion, you know, was desired. So how do we compete?
Yeah, well, I mean, you're exactly right. You know, people. I'm an actuary as well, so I do understand how to work with numbers. And you know, people like me get paid incredible sums of money by economic consultancies, investment banks, and so on, for making predictions which, quite frankly, are, in my view, totally useless. They're either totally useless because they ignore underlying economic processes, or they're totally useless because they're telling you, quite frankly, the bleeding obvious. You know, except they're adding a few more decimal places. And I suppose if you were a socialist, you'd say this is a gigantic market failure.
So we have to wrap up very quick. We have to wrap up now. But can we first of all, Elena wants to make a quick advert, and then we will carry on.
Yeah, my colleagues reminded that there are publications and documentary available at our station in the fair. So please start your adventure and find out more about the scarcity of the world and your own opportunity to grow and advance.
So on that note, can we thank Elena and Philip from the panel? Thank you very much.
Dear guests, thank you very much for joining us at LibertyCon 2025 in Prague. And I would like to big applause for our guest, Elena Leontjeva. Syed Kamall. And Philip Booth. Thank you very much for discussion.